The mechanic wiped his hands again, slower this time, as if the grease on his skin had suddenly become heavier with memory, and he walked around the half-built frame of the car while the multimillionaire talked about Italian leather, diamond-stitched seats, bulletproof glass, and an engine that could hum like a cathedral organ at idle and roar like judgment when unleashed. But the mechanic wasn't really listening anymore because the sound of that voice, polished and confident, had unlocked something buried deep inside him, a truth the rich man could never guess just by looking at a workshop with cracked concrete floors and tools older than most startups, and when the mechanic finally spoke it wasn't to agree or disagree but to ask a single question that landed like a stone dropped into still water. Do you want this car to protect you, or remind you? The multimillionaire laughed at first, a short dismissive chuckle, assuming it was a philosophical flourish from a man who turned wrenches for a living, but then he noticed the mechanic's eyes, steady, knowing, unafraid, and something about them made the laughter die in his throat, because those eyes had seen speed not as luxury but as survival, had measured torque not in horsepower but in heartbeats, and before the rich man could ask what that meant the mechanic reached under a dusty workbench and pulled out a faded metal plate, scarred and bent, stamped with a serial number that had once been burned into the memory of an entire underground racing circuit that no longer officially existed, a number the multimillionaire recognized instantly even though he had never admitted, not even to himself, how closely he had followed those races years ago when he was still nobody, when watching illegal night builds and secret prototypes had been his escape from sleeping in his car and dreaming of becoming someone untouchable. And as recognition dawned his breath shortened because that serial number belonged to a machine rumored to have outperformed military test vehicles, a ghost car whose creator vanished the night it disappeared, taking with him a secret drivetrain design that could rewrite everything the multimillionaire thought he knew about engineering, and the mechanic didn't need to explain any of that because the silence between them did all the work, thick and electric, broken only when the mechanic said quietly, "I built it, not with pride, not with bitterness, just as a statement of fact," and in that moment the balance of the room shifted, the multimillionaire no longer towering over a working man but standing before someone who had once turned down contracts worth fortunes because the price had been obedience, someone who knew exactly what happened when power met fear, and the mechanic continued, explaining how he had walked away when his designs were going to be locked behind patents and used to protect people who would never risk anything themselves, how he had chosen anonymity over becoming a weapon for someone else's ego, and how every custom car he built now carried pieces of that old knowledge, hidden in plain sight, because secrets only stayed alive if they kept moving, and the multimillionaire listened like a student again, like the man he used to be before money wrapped him in insulation from consequence, and when he finally spoke his voice was softer, asking why tell him any of this, why risk revealing a past that could be bought, stolen, or exploited, and the mechanic looked around the shop, at the half-built car, at the door open to the street where ordinary people passed by unaware of the conversation unfolding, and said, "Because you didn't ask for the fastest car, or the most expensive one. You asked for one that felt honest. And honesty has a cost," and that word cost echoed in the multimillionaire's chest because he knew exactly what he had paid to become who he was, the relationships burned, the compromises signed, the silence he bought when things went wrong, and for the first time in years he wondered what kind of machine reflected all of that back at him when he sat alone behind tinted glass, and the mechanic laid out a different vision then, not flashy, not indulgent, but purposeful, a car designed to respond before fear could speak, built with redundancies that assumed failure would happen and planned for it anyway, a machine that didn't lie to its driver about control, and as the explanation flowed the workshop seemed to shrink until it felt like the nerve center of something much larger, a place where truth was still machined by hand, and the multimillionaire realized he wasn't commissioning a car anymore. He was being offered a choice between owning another symbol or confronting a mirror, and the mechanic finished by saying the secret wasn't the engine or the materials or the design everyone chased, the real secret was restraint, knowing when not to push, when to let something endure instead of dominate, and if the rich man wanted that kind of car it would take time, trust, and silence, no branding, no public reveal, no bragging rights, just a machine and the person inside it, and the multimillionaire nodded slowly, understanding that agreeing meant stepping into a story that money alone couldn't control, and as he left the shop he glanced back once more, seeing the mechanic already at work, sparks flying in controlled arcs, shaping something that felt less like a vehicle and more like a confession. And if this story has pulled you in, if you want to know what happens when the richest man in the room realizes he's not the most powerful, and how this secret car will ultimately change both their lives. The car took shape slowly, not in the way luxury builds usually did with press releases and whispered rumors, but in silence, weeks folding into months as the multimillionaire found himself returning to the mechanic's shop without entourage or schedule, learning to sit on an overturned crate and watch hands that knew patience better than any boardroom ever could, and with every visit pieces of the man he thought he was began to loosen, because this build demanded something no contract had ever asked of him before: presence. And as the chassis hardened and the engine core was assembled, the mechanic began to talk, not in lectures, not in confessions, but in fragments, stories of nights when designs were sketched on napkins under flickering streetlights, of a time when innovation was traded like contraband and trust mattered more than capital. And the multimillionaire listened, truly listened, realizing that all his life he had been buying outcomes without understanding processes, owning results without earning insight, and the car became a classroom where failure was not hidden but studied, where parts were rejected not because they were imperfect but because they lied about their limits. And when the mechanic finally revealed the heart of the machine, a hybrid drivetrain unseen by modern engineers, simple in appearance yet terrifyingly responsive, the rich man felt something close to fear, not of speed, but of clarity, because this car would not forgive arrogance. It would amplify intent. And on the night of the first test drive they rolled it out under a sky heavy with clouds, no cameras, no witnesses, just asphalt and anticipation. And as the multimillionaire took the driver's seat, his hands trembled despite himself, the mechanic leaning in only once to say, "It won't save you from bad decisions."